This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
I'm standing in that room and I'm looking and say, wait, I know that guy. I've heard that name before, all of that kind of thing. Hey, that guy was my gym teacher, so I knew, at least I had heard of most of the guys who were in that room and being applauded.
Welcome to Lunch with Chris, where your host, Chris Daly, brings you uplifting interviews with extraordinary individuals making a positive impact. Join as he introduces remarkable people who have left their mark on their respective fields.
Have you ever thought about doing your own podcast? It is the absolute best way to grow your brand, spread your message, and build your following. Fresh Media Works can help. We do all the heavy lifting, and you just focus on your message. To find out how easy we can make launching your new podcast, call 713-269-4620 or check us out at freshmediaworks.com. All right, everybody, welcome back to Lunch with Chris. I'm Chris Daly, and I have two very cool guests today, Rob Lynch, and you're the producer, right, of the film?
I am the producer, yes. One of them.
Right, and then Michael Hurd, who is the author of this cool book, Thursday Night Lights. Ooh, right? I like it. You got your own cheering section. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having us.
You bet. So, gosh, I don't know where to start. Probably ought to start with the book, right? And not that the film was 100% based on it, but it influenced it. Is that correct?
I think that's right. I mean, we leaned on Michael Hurd for a whole lot in this, and also the book, especially when it came to like the Houston, the Turkey Day Classic and things like that, which to me is one of the greatest sports events that ever took place in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I tell you, I've known of the PVIL Hall of Fame for quite a while, and worked with its director and really helped promote the story. So was super excited when the book came out and then the film. I was like, oh, this is great. So Michael, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your background before we get into the book.
Well, I was born in East Texas, in Texarkana, but my family moved to Houston as I was starting fourth grade. So basically, I grew up in Houston. Graduated from Ebony Worthing High School in Sunnyside, which was a PVIL member, back in the day. Mm-hmm. And I ended up spending, I was in the Air Force for 8.5 years as a medic, spent a year in Vietnam and got out and went to University of Texas and studied journalism and started my career at the Houston Post in 1979. And nice. Just kind of bounced around a little bit. Worked at the American Statesman, several times actually. With USA Today, I was a founding member of USA Today. I started there about a month before their first edition hit the streets. So I am a founding member of USA Today. I got the coffee cup somewhere to prove that. And I worked there for about a dozen years. And then, Yahoo Sports as an editorial producer, San Francisco Examiner. And then, of course, my three books. I wrote the first book was the history of Black college football. And that came out in 91 or 93 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I also wrote a book about a guy named Collie J. Nicholson, who was a publicist at Grambling during Eddie Robinson's time there. Yeah. And Collie was this visionary publicist who, part of this three-headed monster at Grambling. President Ralph Waldo Emerson Jones, got the funding and all of that for the program. Eddie, of course, did his thing on the field with the players. And Collie was the guy who was the media guy. Yeah. And he put the word out about Grambling to all of the major outlets around the country, primarily for Black publications, Black newspapers, and so forth and so on. But I wrote his biography. He was the first Black Marine correspondent, war correspondent during World War II. So anyway, that was my second book, and then of course we get to a Thursday Night Lights,
Yeah.
which is, my most popular book by far, and a book that came out published by UT Press in 2017, and talking about my era in high school, because the games that I went to in Houston were on Thursday nights, Wednesday and Thursday nights,
Yep.
At Jefferson Stadium in Third Ward. That's the question that I get asked most about that book is, what was Thursday Night Lights? What was
Yeah.
Thursday night? A lot of people, this book opened a lot of eyes and made a lot of people aware of some incredible athletes and high school football programs in high school football mad Texas that a lot of people just weren't aware of.
Yeah.
So I'm extremely proud of this book, and also part of my career was working at Prairie View for a short while, 2015 to 2021, writing about and doing a website covering 500 years of Black history in Texas.
Nice.
That's
I love
that's
that.
a short story of my life. So
That's a short one. Good. Yeah. And I tell you, if you ask the average Texas high school football fan, they see Thursday Night Lights, they're going to think JV because that's what
exactly,
it is to a lot of the high
exactly,
schools. Yeah, and
exactly.
this history is so amazing. I've always been a history guy, and I love books about football and football history. So I devoured this one.
Yeah,
Uh,
and Chris, I was stunned, and I don't know. I think I might say this in the film, Rob, but I was stunned because I had no idea what Friday Night Lights were all about. Even though I grew up as a sports fan in Houston, the first time I heard that, I had no idea what that was about.
uh,
Just like people had no idea what Thursday Night Lights were about. So, but yeah, so like I said, this opened a lot of eyes for a lot of people.
Love it, love it. Well, let's jump over to Rob real quick. Rob Lynch, give us your background, your 30,000
Well,
foot
if you're looking
view.
for a resume like that, you're going to be extremely disappointed because I don't have anything like that. I grew up a coach's kid. Was born in Houston, Texas. Graduated from high school in Lawton, Oklahoma. My dad was a longtime football, college, and professional coach in Europe. We coached professional in Europe. He didn't coach high school or college in Europe, but
Hmm.
we moved around a lot. Before I graduated from high school, we lived in 8 houses because sometimes you think, well, maybe he's a good coach and he got other jobs. Maybe he was a bad coach and he
All
got fired a
right.
lot. So I don't know which one it was, but he ended up with some pretty good jobs every time we moved somewhere. So we got to meet a lot of people and do a lot of things. And I think I said this the other day. A lot of the inspiration I had was when we moved to a small town in South Texas, and he was the head coach, and it was not far after integration, and
Mhm.
he played a black quarterback who was at the film in Victoria, and that wasn't the most popular thing to do in town when he did that. So I got to experience. I'm not going to say I had any rare close to the experiences that the guys that really went through it did. But when you're, 12 years old and people are telling you what's wrong with your dad for playing that guy at quarterback, and you say, well, he's the best guy in the school. And he went on to play college football.
Yeah.
But so I got to experience the PVIL part firsthand. My athletic background, I was a guy that couldn't follow rules, but I was really, really fast and got a lot of chances. Played football a little bit in college and then left and ran USA track and field. Later on, I won the Huntsman World Games in the long jump. It only takes one good day, and that's what I did. So that's kind of my background. It doesn't compare to anything that guy we just got through talking to.
So tell me what got you involved with making this film?
Well, obviously my experiences growing up in the Black community, that when we moved to Port Lavaca, I would go home with guys that live down off the South End on the other side of the tracks, if you will, and always thought a lot of that community. That community, they had a gathering place that was a satellite lounge, and everybody said, boy, don't go in the satellite. Well, me and my brother ate a lot of hamburgers in the satellite lounge and drank a lot of Coca-Colas, and we knew we were safe. My dad and mom knew we were safe.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, the community I experienced as a 12, 13-year-old boy in small town South Texas was exactly what we discovered in this film. When guys would talk about the community they grow up in, Kenny Houston talks about, if you were out past 10 o'clock and saw Elmer Red's big Cadillac turn the corner, you better get home in a hurry. And I think the community part of that those guys grew up in, it was just an experience that I think so many people would like to live today. In today's world, I think people would like to live that like that. And fortunately, I think Michael said that. I think unfortunately a lot of that's gone. That was one of the things that left when the PVIL left. And then I have a lot of great friends that play. They were friends, teammates, and things like that. Joe Green, Kenny Houston, Elmo Wright, guys I've known for a long time, and they would tell the stories about what they went through and what they experienced. And so, am I still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what they experienced. And so we had just gotten off another project about Coach Phillips. And we were sitting at the Houstonian Hotel and said, what's going to be next? And I said, well, how about the PVIL? And some people, well, what about the Southwest Conference? Well, let's tell some stories about some other things. I said, no, I think we got to tell this story while these guys are still alive.
Yep.
And fortunately, what we were able to do is almost every single person, all the interviews we did were people that lived through it. There was no hearsay. There was no, this is what somebody said. And I think that's what makes this film so unique. And this is a bit morbid, but we got most of these guys before they died. Yep. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. A lot of my career has been interviewing coaches and players historically for that very reason. Everybody has an amazing story. And it's just a matter of, are we capturing these? So Michael, talk to me about the book itself. What was the onus for that? How did you put that together? I mean, I've written a few books, so I know, but the average audience might not know how you put something like that together. It's a big task.
Well, I really like what Rob said, and let me also say that I was just overjoyed to hear that Rob was doing this film, that they were doing that documentary, because just like Thursday Night Lights, the book, this documentary is long overdue, and I just want to publicly congratulate Rob and Mark for putting this thing together, and for including me. But I had from writing the Black College Football book. And I look at both of those books and I'm like, it's basically the same book. It's the same story.
Yep.
You're talking about athletic teams or athletic pursuits that have been long, overdue or hidden, if you will, and that sort of thing. But I had started thinking about doing this back around 2007. I had just moved back from California to Austin, and I was starting a project called the Texas Black History Preservation Project. And that's a project where we were going to document 500 years of Black history in Texas. And as part of that, with my sports writing background, I wanted to talk about Black high school football in Texas because I knew it really hadn't been dealt with very much. And so one of the pivotal things that happened was I met Robert Brown. Robert Brown, of course, is in the film, and Robert is director for the Prairie View Interscholastic League Coaches Association. And what they do is recognize all of these players and coaches from back in the day for the PVIL, which was around for 50 years, from 1920 to 1970. And I went to their annual banquet, their Hall of Fame banquet. That, excuse me, that year they had it in Austin. And I went and I heard about it and I went and I met Robert and I was standing in this room. And there may be only a couple of hundred guys in that room for that banquet that year. Now Robert has about 1,000, 1,200 people
Yeah.
at the event. But I'm standing in that room and I'm looking and say, wait, I know that guy. I've heard that name before, all of that kind of thing. Hey, that guy was my gym teacher, so I knew, at least I had heard of most of the guys who were in that room and being applauded. And that's when I really started thinking, I wonder if anybody has ever written anything in depth about the PVIL. And I'll admit, when I was at Worthing in high school, I had never heard of the PVIL. I had no idea there was such a thing as the PVIL or the UIL.
Right.
Just that, the teams played their schedule and then somebody played for the championship and here we are. But I met Robert and I started thinking about it and I started my research and looking into it. And I started calling around to all the libraries, all the major libraries in the state, asking about, what do you have on Black high school football? And a lot of those librarians had no idea what I was talking about. They had never heard of it. They had never heard that there was such a thing as Black high schools, So so I'm kind of stunned at that, though, when I started doing my book about Black college football and was doing the same research, calling around the major libraries across the country. And a lot of the responses I got was, you mean about O.J. Simpson? Like, no. I ended up educating a lot of librarians about that there were higher education institutions that were predominantly African American, not only in terms of students, but professors and that sort of thing. And kind of did the same thing with Thursday Night Lights, making people aware, people who should know those stories.
Yeah, these are supposed to be our repositories of knowledge. And I love libraries, don't get me wrong, but you're right.
Exactly. And most of the people that I spoke with had no idea about what little Black high schools and their existence, let alone the PVIL and what that was about. So that started my research. And then just in the course of going around and saying, all right. And another thing that Rob has said, that, I wanted to get to some of those guys before they passed on.
Right.
And there were so many of those guys, just incredible coaches and players. And nobody, for the most part in this state, knew about those guys. Right. And it was just sad, but telling the story was so cathartic for me because it took me back to my days at Worthing and going to Jefferson Stadium on Wednesday or Thursday nights, going to the Turkey Day Classic and all that, and what all of that meant to the Black community during that time of segregation. So I just started digging around and calling and finding out, I need to talk to this guy, connect me here and there, And I was thinking the other night at the screening that if I had started that book today, I probably could have done that book in like 2 or 3 months. Because there's so much more out there now. I'm finding so much more out there. Not a lot of film, but a lot of images, and a lot of the alumni associations are starting to bring back, a lot of the memorabilia, because so much of that stuff was destroyed, during integration when all of those Black schools closed down. There were roughly 500 PVIL member schools at its peak, by the time it starts to go under. But only 228 of those schools actually had football programs. But when integration came along and they started closing all those Black schools and busing students to, previously all white schools, a lot of their memorabilia just went in the trash.
Wow.
A lot of alumni and community members started pulling that stuff out of all these dustbins and closets with cobwebs and all their trophies and that sort of stuff. So I just started calling around and talking to people, and Just got some fantastic stories, and it was
Yeah.
just such a treat.
Yeah, no doubt. And Rob, let's kind of go down that same vein with you on putting this film together. What was the process and how did you get Michael involved?
Well, I mean, I live in Kingwood, in close to Houston, and there's not many people that don't know who Michael Hurd is in the sports arena in the Houston, in the state of Texas. There's not a lot of people, so we basically were leaning on him and Joe Holly, who writes for he's a prize-winning writer and has known Michael for a long time. When he started this story, he said, "Now, is Michael Hurd in this?" And we said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, you can't tell this story without Michael Hurd in it." So he said, "Well, no, we've already contacted him. He's in it." But to piggyback on what Michael said, research is extremely difficult. Now, one thing, and I also agree, if we could start it now, what we've learned and
Yeah.
what we've discovered, it would go a lot faster. We were in production for 2 years on this film, but we did stumble across a honey hole, and thanks to Joe Green, who went to University of North Texas, he said,
Yep.
contact my, we were looking for him, stuff for him, and so we got to the library, and they had some film that was donated to them from an old TV station. And in the film, you will see the actual games from the PVIL that they had from an old TV station, some parades. And we didn't get it in the film, but there's several photo or film footage of a homecoming parade in Fort Worth, and it is amazing to see the spirit, and it goes back to the community that these people grew up in. And you look at that and say, well, they look happy to me because they didn't let that bother them.
Right.
They were living in their lives, in their town, in their community, and having as much fun as anybody. So yeah, but the archives of this film were not easy, and we were able to find some newspaper articles, but mainly you have to go to the horse's mouth, just like Michael did with the book.
Yeah, definitely. And Michael, if you could tell people where they can get the book, because I can't recommend it enough. I know I talked to you about, we need to get it listed on Lone Star Gridiron, because it is such a good book.
Thank you for that, Chris. The It's available online. You can get it on Amazon, whatever, that sort of thing. And of course, UT Press, their website, you can get it through them as well. And this book came out in 2017, and I'm, I guess, mildly surprised that it still has some legs.
Got
You
legs. Yeah.
People
Well,
are people
the
are
film helps. Yes.
yeah, and people are just discovering it, and and one of the things that I'm really proud about, or was really glad to see, is so many people who have gotten this book. And when I go to my presentations and I talk to people afterwards, and they're like, thank you
Yeah.
for writing this book, thank you for telling this story. But yeah, the book is available online, or at my presentations. I really enjoy, having the book at the presentation, not
Yeah.
just selling the book, but getting to talk with fans. And so many who do remember,
Yep.
and I don't know if it's odd, but, at a lot of my presentations, the majority of the people at those presentations are white.
Yeah.
And that has kind of been an eye opener for me. They remember that history. They know what that time was like
Yeah.
and how fair it was, but for what the black schools had to go through, what the black communities had to go
Yeah.
through. They remember that time, and they love to talk about it. They remember those games.
Yeah. Yeah. True fans didn't care what it was.
Mm-mm.
So that's it, and true fans come in all colors.
Exactly. And the one of the stories that I tell a lot is that for Conroe Washington High School, they talked a lot about when they would go on the road to play, there would be white fans from Conroe who would
Yeah.
go on the road to follow them. Not necessarily the black community fan, but the white fans would go, because that was just incredible program in Conroe, Washington. Just an incredible program. But it was that kind of interaction, that I was really glad to hear. and I love talking to those fans about it.
I love that. And Rob, tell me about the film, where people can see it, where they can pick up copies of it.
Well, currently, right now, you can go, and it's basically a marketing tool for us right now until we are able to sell the film.
Mhm.
But it's a maddogentertainment.tv. You can go to maddogentertainment.tv. I think it's $4.99 to purchase the film, and it's well worth the watch. But
Yeah.
we're talking about the white fans. It's funny because my dad's 94, my mom's 92. And they were watching the film for the first time. And my mom is highly educated. I'm from education. My dad was a coach, which technically, I guess, is education. And my mom was a counselor and history teacher. So she was watching the film, and she was from Los Angeles. And she said, I remember Daddy used to take us out to that game when we moved here from LA because he wanted to go see that game. He loved watching that game.
Yeah.
And so the Turkey Day Classic was a white event as well. People look forward to that.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I tell a lot was my dad was an all-city fullback here in Houston. And his coach took them to the Turkey Day Classic one day, and there was 3 guys sitting in the stands with their coach. And one of the kids asked the coach, he said, Coach, would you trade one of us for one of those guys? And he said, I'd trade all 3 of you for one of those guys.
I love that.
That's a great story. The Turkey Day Classic used to have kind of an unofficial white section.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And in that section would be a lot of white high school coaches.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Pick up on what Pat Patterson, the Yates coach, was doing, or Frank Walker, the Wheatley coach, was doing. And so there would be this contingent of white fans, mostly white coaches, come to see those guys play and pick up a few tips.
Wow, I love that. Gosh, Rob and Michael, I want to thank you both so much for not only being here. That's the small part. The big part are these things you created, these historical, the book, the film. I mean, what a contribution. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, Chris, thank you so much.
Ready to grow your podcast beyond 1,000 downloads per episode? Join the Podcast Masters Guild and unlock proven strategies, expert coaching, and a community of fellow podcasters to elevate your show. Visit freshmediaworks.com/PMG and start growing today.